line 2 in slide 3?
No, slides 2 and 3.
Okay. Yep.
Is there a difference between add redux and add react dash redux in slide 3? Wait a minute. I have a different. Do I have a difference?
You mean React Redux? React dash Redux?
Yeah. I'm sorry, slide 5.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Because I never did 3 and it still worked.
I actually already added them to the project. So if you didn't do it, it wouldn't trip you up. If you did do it, it's just part of the process and it's not going to hurt anything. So why did I say we have to use this other tool called React Redux? What's the point of that tool?
Because Redux is separate from React. It connects it.
Yeah. Because Redux is its own independent thing. It has nothing to do with React. If we want to combine them together to be a useful thing, this tool does that for us. We didn't have to use React Redux. We could have coded our own tool to connect them together, but I don't really want to do that if someone else did it. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. So it was in there. That's
Yeah.
why I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it was already added. Mm-hmm.
Get the today's code.
Oh, yeah. What's it? Can you pull up the attendance code?
Yes.
Yep. So glad you brought that up. Any other thoughts?
X6ZY.
X6. Oh, there's no markers. X6ZY.
Is it case sensitive?
No. Yeah, any other thoughts like that? Questions? So those feelings are totally normal, but we just need to somehow just get through it. And as long as you can make it work, that's all that matters. Understanding in depth comes later. I probably worked for 5 years before I understood anything at all that was going on. Maybe 7 years. I'd say 7 years. From first 7 years working, I just made things happen, made things work, and I got a paycheck. Okay. What is next? So we need to move on to using fetch in Redux together. So I have that as day 9 and 10, but I think I'm going to race through it and do both of them. So we can get to, you'll have one practice for Redux and fetch together, and then checkpoint 1, which will be everything we've learned up to this point. So there is a lab project for address book. Oh, let's do this real quick. Forgot this. Find the error. Let's do this find the error. And this is the Twitter thing after we had implemented Redux. So the first one was just broken from using props and passing props over and over and over. This one is after we implemented Redux. So our reducers and actions are here, and then we put the tweets, we connected it. We didn't make separate container files, but that's fine. We don't have to do that. But there's an error in tweets that says, cannot read property map of undefined. Look at this and tell me why. I mean, hint, hint, it has something to do with the way we're coding our Redux stuff. Why is that error happening? We'll just keep it easy. It is in this file, so you can just look up here or look on yours. Key of what? line. Yeah. Yep. The tweets component is asking for a prop the tweets, but you mapped the tweets into a prop called the tweet, which is not what it wanted. So you could change the original component, which is not good because the component shouldn't change. You need to remember that. Good. Okay, one more. So we had the action in the add tweets component, and we mapped dispatch to props for add the tweet, which then added the tweet. But if I add one, it says default is not a function, which, I don't know why it says that error, but let's say add tweet is not the function. Or sorry, yeah, add the tweet is not a function. What am I doing wrong in here? And it is, yeah, it is in this file. What syntax is a little off that I'm sure you're going to run into all the time, if you probably have run into it all the time. So we need to practice, like, what is making add tweet not a valid function? So you're going to say, well, I imported it. I imported this action. That's right. I imported this action, add tweet. But when I call it, it's saying it's not a function. What's wrong? Someone must have run into this in their project. Did I point this out to anyone? Did you? That's optional, right? So you're right. I showed it this way, so that has nothing to do with it. What code is making add tweet not a function? I'm importing it.
Is it the
Because it's a props.
Default. It's not the default. So, right, good point. Add tweet's not a default. Yeah. Yep. So those are two very popular issues. Top 10, top 5 actually, top 3 probably, on our favorite issues countdown.
Too late to go over your actions again?
What do you mean go over them? Like, you want to look at this action?
No, I mean, just the flow of it. When you typed it in, what component is that you're typing in? Is it on?
Add tweet.
Okay.
So the component represents the interface, the UI. It is just this text box and this button.
Alright. So when you clicked on change,
Mhm.
it called a function. That function was dispatched from props, but you had to link props to the state, or sorry, the function from the state to props.
Not state. So when we're talking about actions and changing data, state is not important in the container or the component. So
Okay, so just on that function.
yeah, we can say put action functions into props, put functions into props.
Now, dispatch tells Redux to go at the function you're looking for, or is it telling it to go do something at the action?
Right. So we are dispatching this action, which is just simply this object. We are saying, hey, Redux, we want to add a tweet, the only way we can communicate that is by using strings, because there's no other way we can like describe things. But so this is just an object that goes right here into this action, and then you dispatch this object. So this,
Nowhere in there did you say the type was add tweet.
so it's right as if I did this. Oh, no bars. So this is kind of a good point, right? That's all that accomplished. If I just call this function that returns this object, well, that's just what it did. It put this object in this variable.
Okay, so it went to the action to create that.
Yep. And good point. Why don't I do this? Why don't I just put this action object just right here? That would just simplify it a lot, and like it wouldn't cause as much distractions, right? So that I could do that. That'd be totally fine. But why don't I? Right? Yeah, it'd be too easy. And how is easy going to hurt us in the long run? Not exactly about dynamics. What our app, the way it is right now, is very simple. But what if there was other components that wanted to add a tweet? Like they whatever it was, they also wanted to add tweet. According to this, what would I do? I'd C and P. What does that mean?
Copy paste.
Yeah, copy paste. I'd be like, oh, my other component wants to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy and paste that and put it in the other component. Because this is the magic word that tells Redux what I want it to do. Well, what's the problem with that? What if I for some reason change this? Like that decision is made for some reason. I don't know why. It's possible. What would I have to do in all the other places that I copy and pasted it? Yeah, go find it and change it. This has nothing to do with what Redux requires of you. It's just, this is the central location where you define all of the things that can happen inside of your app. Because other components might want to add a tweet. So it should be in a central location. So if I changed it here, then that's the only place I would have to change it. No other place. So if we have to visualize it like all this is doing is putting this object, let me change this to left, because we shouldn't use var, right? This is the same as this. There's no like significant magic to it. It's just a way to organize the code better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I'm confused at like how it.
Right. So
is the dispatch action sending it to props, or is dispatch action running at tweet?
where does it go from dispatch? What's the next line of code that gets hit? Or I'm sorry, which file will it go to using files? Of course, that's not exactly realistic, but which code will it go from here? You can't know what's happening unless you look at the source code. You'll never understand it. So, say that again? Not action index. This line of code right here. So after line 27 executes, you can either look at the source code or you can just know that it magically goes to which file.
Store.
Nope. What'd you say? Yeah, producers. Yep. It magically goes here. So that action, this function gets called, the action gets sent in. That action was add tweet. So we say, hey, I only care about the add tweet. And if it is the add tweet, then I'm going to add that tweet to the array and return it. Right? So yeah, there's this whole flow of code you're missing, but you just have to take it for granted because otherwise we'll be just studying Redux source code for weeks.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was going to action. And that what it's coming back is the result of what action does.
Yep, that's it. It's this part is not a Redux special thing. It's just here's a function over here, just returning. Yep, that's it. There's no special Reduxiness to that. But yeah, good thoughts. Good question.
Wait, say that again. The action, it's just making it to index.js.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, it's not special Redux stuff going on. It's just we put a function in another file for organizational purposes, and because other components might want to use it. And if we trapped it inside this component, then we'd have to start copying and pasting. And we don't want to do that.
Where did tweet come from?
It's a parameter.
You made it's add the tweet. Is what it's in.
Send it in. This function right here is this. So, is that it? Yeah. Okay. So we need to, however you want to remember that, because at some point you're going to run into those two issues we just went over. Let's see. This advanced Ajax address book has some instructions, but we kind of already went over the Ajax stuff. So I'm just going to go through it real quick to refresh our memories. We don't need to actually do it for an assignment or anything. Let's see. Okay, so, oops, I don't like expanding stuff. Did y'all talk about component life cycles? Does anyone know what that is?
Is that the component will now, component did now?
Yeah, yep,
Kind of talk about it.
okay, yep. So, just like people, React components go through a life cycle. Just like we are born, we go through certain ages, and then we die. But, so, for example, like when you turn 16, you can choose to drive a car or not. When you turn 18, you can choose to vote or smoke or not. Those are the stages at which you can decide to do something or not. And components model the same way. And this concept is done throughout software. It's not just React. It's not just components. All different types of software use this concept of a life cycle in which there's different stages at which you can choose to do something. And the most common one for React is component did mount. So if we look at the official definition of it, on the documentation, what we're going to see that's very important is this is invoked immediately after it's mounted. If you need to load data from a remote endpoint, this is a good place to instantiate the network request. What does that sentence mean? What's a simplified way to say that? Yeah, fetch. Exactly. Good. So all it boils down to is start a fetch call, invoke a fetch call in the component did mount lifecycle. So, can I start this? Yeah. So, in this address book, I've just got a bunch of users. If you click on view, it changes whatever one you clicked on. But we don't want to have it the way it is, which is it's hard-coded to the state.js file, which is what we've been doing. And if you want to follow along with this, follow along. Otherwise, just watch the video and use that as a reference. So if I take out the hard coding of state, oh, wait a minute, totally skipping this. So we need to be aware of how our projects are going to operate from now on when we start them. What is this number 5100 mean? What is that? Yeah, what's a port? Any network people here?
It's a slot.
Slot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. How many web servers do you think can be running on one computer at a time? 1 or 2, 3, or 1 million? Yeah, 1 million maybe. 65,000, yeah. 65,000 ports. So if I just go to localhost and I had 2 web servers running, how would I know which one I'm trying to get to? Well, that's what the port's for. So in our apps, the web page is running on 5100 just for the web page. But another web server is running for data. And I know we already went through this, but it's running off of that db.json file. And it is running our JSON server. That is just a tool that allows us to build a quick web server without having to do a lot of work. Okay, so we talked about our communication from client to server, and we said, well, what is the message called that computers use to talk to each other? What's the 4 letters? Yep, HTTP. So if we take out the browser to remove confusion, all we're doing is saying one computer is talking to another computer, sending HTTP messages. So we saw a GET to the URL that's doing the data server. If I did a post, what does a post do? Sends it. Yep, post sends something. So I'm going to say raw JSON just to, because we're using JSON data, we're sending JSON data. So if I look in the file now, whatever I just posted, it's going to be down at the bottom. It goes into that file. What's one more thing? What's put? Set. Yeah, setting it. So we can get one single user. If we put /1, it gets the user with the ID. What does delete do? What's it going to do to that file if I delete? It's going to remove it. Yep, I removed person 1. It's no longer in that file. Okay, so we went through all that, and we're seeing how we're actually really we're implementing real communication between client and server, where the client is affecting the data on the server. Even though it's kind of weird because they're both on the same computer, we have to like try and separate it out. And I would pretend Postman is on one computer, and then the running server, which is represented as the process running in your terminal, this is on another computer. We have to like try and visualize that, because we can't work with two computers. That's silly. I mean, I guess you could, and eventually you will, but for testing purposes, all this has to be done on one computer. So keep that in mind, because that's going to be one of those things that trips you up. You're going to forget that the browser is, you have to pretend it's on one computer, and then the web server is on a totally different computer. So then we say, well, that's great for testing, but how the heck do we do that in code? Because I need my code to be able to make an HTTP request. So if I have app, how do I have to change the app component in order to make it have a lifecycle stage on it, a lifecycle method? How does it change from what it is now, which is a function component? Yep. So only class components can have lifecycle methods on it. Is there any difference to this method versus, well, does it have to be called component did mount? Is that a rule? Yeah, that's a rule. Okay. So according to the instructions of Redux, or actually, sorry, React, this is where you do fetch calls. So I'm going to say, well, that's what it told me to do, so I'm going to do that. Okay. What am I missing from the fetch? So if I do this, it will make a fetch call, and I can see that through the network inspector. I can see that the network thing is actually happening. There it is right there. What other things do I have to add to fetch to make it useful? Do I have to do this? Does that actually let me get the user's data? Is that what you do? What's one of the keywords that you use with fetch, even if you don't understand it? Like what other thing goes with fetch? Yeah. So we're going to use our checklist. Our fetch checklist to understand the syntax. There's also a fetch cheat sheet, whichever one you want to use to like remember the syntax. But I'm always going to go, fetch always has two thens. What type of thing do you send into the then call? An object, an array? What do I type right here? A number, a Boolean, What JavaScript thing goes into the then? Yep, function. I said everything except function. Yep. And then I would say, well, first then always has the same thing. There's no, for our, what we're going to be doing, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You just do this, whether you understand it or not. What is this doing? Do you have any idea why we have to do this part first? What is
Turning it into a JSON file, like what's returned from the test or the promise or
Yep.
something like that.
Right? It's turning it into that from what? What was it originally? Like if we didn't do anything, what is being returned by fetch calls? What is this? Is it code? Yeah, it's text file. It's just plain text. That's the only thing that computers can send to each other is just plain words. It's up to the tools to then say, well, I know this is supposed to be JavaScript, so I'm going to turn it from plain text into actual JavaScript. So that's what this code accomplishes. There might be some weird reason why you would just want the string value of this. Maybe a very specialized situation, but almost always when we're building our apps, we want the JavaScript representation of it, not the string representation. So once we do this, in this variable is going to be all that data as a JavaScript. In this case, it's different every time, but what's it going to be in this case according to the syntax? Yeah, an array of objects. Okay. So if I'm going to make this, I'm going to go in reverse. So I'm going to say, I don't want to use this Redux container anymore. I want to use just the normal component. Users. What do you think you type here? So the second then is always custom. Whatever code goes in the second then could be anything. So what do you think it could be here? Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So in this case, just because what we're trying to do is say, take the users, I probably should say users here, and put them in the state so that it populates this prop. In which text?
Line 19. You're typing users and listing users.
Oops. Silly thing. I'll also have to. So.
When you use users and you, in line 14, you set it as a variable.
Which line?
Line 14, you set users as a variable.
Huh. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Can I? Does anyone know the question to that? Will there be a conflict that I created a users variable right here, but then I made another one right here? Will there be any conflict or problems? No. Yeah, this one will just overwrite this one or take precedence over this one. So if I had that in it, this one would just be hidden by this variable. But I just had that there for testing purposes. I didn't even need that.
I think we're setting the user that.
Right, but that was to demo that you don't do that. But if I did, bonus question. What would be in this variable something? If you've happened to run into that or already did this. This one? Well, there's a specific term for it. What's the term for the thing that would be in here? Yeah. Yep. The promise. Fetch returns a promise. So that's a good point. If we list of users, let's see. If we look at, is it async slides? What do promises replace? Did you go over that? What's asynchronous processing?
Step by step.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to look at it. So there is a thing that is happening that I know you've worked with Fetch a little bit, but before Fetch, in all the stuff you've done in intermediate, you've never encountered this before. The computer processing has been transferred to somewhere else, right? So when you do a fetch call, where does the computer processing transfer to?
Server?
Yeah, the server. Or the internet, which is a bunch of servers, so yeah, the server. And you say, well, can you control the internet? Can you control someone else's server? Do you have any control over what it does? Do you? No, I don't control the internet. So your code is now waiting for the internet to do something. We can't make our software come to a standstill while it's waiting for the internet to do stuff. So what do you think? Let's pretend fetch was not asynchronous. And let's say the internet was broken and it took 10 seconds for a fetch call to finish, but it wasn't asynchronous. What's the opposite of asynchronous? Synchronous. What do you think would happen? List of users is not defined. What line was that? 84. List of users. The heck? Error? Anyone see the problem?
Which one? 28?
Oh, duh. I gotta click on it. That's what I tell all you guys. Click on this. Click on this. Oh. Well, besides the error, what would happen to the web page if the fetch call was not asynchronous? Like, what can you imagine would be happening in your web page? Kind of. What would the person using your web page see? Like, what would they experience? Nope. What else would they experience when they tried to do anything else? Yeah, exactly. So if our fetch call was synchronous, they would start clicking on text boxes and buttons and doing whatever else they wanted to do, and nothing would happen. They would just be, maybe even the mouse wouldn't move. They would just be sitting there like, what the heck's going on? My app is frozen. So we can't do that. Default what? Nope. I'm going to, yeah, I mean, if this was not, what the heck is happening? If the fetch was not asynchronous and it just had to sit there like, hey, internet, you know, I'm waiting on you. No, everything would be frozen. There's nothing you could do about that. That is how JavaScript works. Yeah, there's nothing you could do about it. But because it is asynchronous, it doesn't do that, right? That's why we have to use asynchronous processing. But the problem with that is that, okay, your code continues on. So if we're debugging this line by line, which line of code is going to hit first? Line 18 or 20? In the component did mount method, which line will get hit first? 20? Does anyone think anything else? 18? Any other takers? Yeah, 20. Line 20 will get hit first. Because right here, this is when the fetch call is done. This is the next line of code after fetch. I mean, the code's mushed up, but this is technically all one line of code. So because it's asynchronous, you do the fetch call, and then it just goes to the next line. So, I mean, I don't have to tell you that. I can prove it. Fetch done. Line of code right after fetch. So you can prove it to yourself by doing the console log and seeing which line of code gets executed. Line of code right after fetch, fetch done. Let's see, what else? What else could we look at about that?
What's the point of the second dot line? I get the first one.
Right. This is where we have access to the data in a JavaScript variable as an array.
The first one gets the response, converts it to JSON.
Mm-hmm.
It then takes it to the next place. You manipulate it however,
Mm-hmm.
and then return the finality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And that finality is known as users.
Yes. Did I have to call this users? No. Yeah. This is whatever variable you want to make that's going to contain the payload for the response.
Is there no way you could just combine the two bit functions? Or is there like, is it just for syntax reasons, two separate things?
Yeah. You can't combine them because they represent two totally separate tasks. Turning it into JSON and then being done with turning it into JSON. Or, yeah. So, well, actually, this is, the fetch call is done here. This is, we're done turning the response into a JSON or a JavaScript object. Yeah.
Representations on which you
Like you mean code here?
Yeah.
Nope. This is where you have access to the data. I can now do whatever I want. It's up to your imagination in JavaScript. Yep. Does that word, does it matter if it's called res? Nope, this has nothing to do with components. This is, what is res? Yeah, good point out. What is RES short for? Yeah. Response. Nope. This right here is a function. This variable is trapped inside this function. And this variable right here represents all this information in the response. All this data, all this other stuff that we don't want. So we have to pick out exactly what we want.
And because it's an array, the .json method exists. Is the response always an array?
This exists because fetch, it's built into fetch. It's just part of the fetch tool. What else do you think you could type here? Yep. You're familiar with that. Hopefully you're not, because XML is terrible.
You like that when it was in HTML.
Yeah. It's the parent of HTML. So this is just a tool in fetch that says, well, the raw data is just a string. How are you supposed to parse a string yourself? You could, it'd be a pain in the butt, or you can just let the fetch tool do it for you. And you say, well, I want it to be in JSON format. I want it to be in XML format. Sure, there's some other ones. I don't know them off the top of my head. And then this itself creates a promise. That's why there's a second then to handle the promise that comes out of this. The second one is then, here's your data as you asked for it. Now do what you will.
The response, we happen to know, I'm not sure I'm getting my answer. We don't know what kind of data type it is. We're just telling it, please convert it to JSON.
You have to know what data type it is.
Okay.
When you code this, you know what it is. But if you don't do this, if I didn't do this, what do you think, what JavaScript type do you think user would be? I guess it users. Yeah, string. How could I do anything useful with all that information if it was just a string? Is that what you mean? This is just a utility tool to say, please convert this to a JavaScript object for me, or a JavaScript array.
That's what I'm saying, like, nowhere in here did we know it was a string. You're saying it always is a string in
Yeah.
response.
Yeah, it's always a string.
So the only caveat I have to that is I have stuff that I'm working to automate where it is XML returned, or it's returning me as XML. I have to take it out and put it in JSON, which is a whole other manual step.
Whatever you're talking about with your stuff, this only refers to the web browser. There's no fetch on the server. So I don't know. That's specific to whatever tool you're using. Sure, why not? Yeah.
If they use the same variables in the set and then it's impossible.
Nope. Where is this variable trapped? This is just a function. This parameter is trapped inside of here. Yeah, you could make as many fetch calls as you wanted. Would I really make a fetch call inside of component did mount? Is that ideal? Where else could I put this fetch call to make it cleaner?
Like in its own file?
Yeah, sure, exactly. Yep. So I could be thinking, well, how many fetch calls could I have? I probably shouldn't have 10 different fetch calls just right in here in the component did mount. That would get a little messy. You could do it if you wanted, but there's no reason I can't move this fetch call to another file, put it in its own function. I'm just going to type here for testing purposes. You wouldn't do it here, but and then put it in its own file, export it, then import it, and then just call get users. Something like that. Yeah, those are just things for you to think about, to get creative, because you know the JavaScript capabilities. You know you can do this stuff. It's just thinking, should I do it? Well, sure. Moving code to other files and organizing it better is always a good thing. So, what is the next thing? I don't need to do the post. Let's move on to, so there was some error. Let me see. Let me try this one more time. List of users. Why is this breaking? Otherwise, I'll just ad-lib it. Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, back to, okay. So what is the problem with what I just did? I was like, hey, I'm going to go back to using the component the way it is, or just the regular component. I took the container away. What is the problem with that? What's the problem with what I just did here? It's kind of obvious. Maybe it's too obvious. Is there a technical problem with it? Or just, what is making that break? Oh, I didn't set up the state. What's the problem with the fact that I stopped using the container and now I'm using the normal component? Ah, there we go. Any thoughts? It's just as simple as we want to use Redux. We don't want to go back to using the components. So I did that, but we don't want to do that because Redux is the tool we're using to manage all the data. So getting rid of it doesn't help us at all. So where do you think, so I'm gonna say, well, gotta undo what we just did because that's not helping us. So we need to look at our checklist of, let's see, Redux Thunk checklist. And this is going to tell us how we use fetch with Redux. Has anyone heard of this word thunk before? Yeah, so it is just a smart word. We don't need to really understand that. It's just the name of something. So the important thing is that Redux cannot use fetch by default. It doesn't know how to deal with asynchronous code. It wasn't designed for that. So we need to add this tool that lets us work with fetch in Redux. So in the Redux Thunk checklist, we are going to have, let's see, we need to modify our store file. And then, as I said before, we don't want to actually put the fetch code inside component did mount. Where do you think it's going to go in terms of Redux? Where might we put it within our Redux realm environment? In reducers? Yeah, I might say actions, because the act of getting users, whether it was from the server or from our state file, that's just well, the act of loading users. So like saying that you want to get users from a server, I would say that's an action. You're initiating an action to get the information from the server. So maybe that's how you think of it. And that is how it is usually thought of. So because you now have asynchronous processing, just like there's two thens that represent the two things that have to happen with asynchronous processing, you're going to have two actions to represent I want to load users, and then telling you when you're done, when the fetch call is done. So you're initiating something, and then you're telling Redux when it's finished. Besides that, what is weird about this action up to, based on what we've done with actions so far? How is this action unusual? Yeah, it's returning a function instead of an object. What do you think, what made it possible to return a function instead of an object? Which one is this? That. What tool? Yeah, thunk. So let's see. What's middleware? What's the concept of middleware? Anyone heard that term before? No. Does anyone have a guess as to what it means? Maybe. Oh no, it doesn't have anything to do with back end versus front end. Good guess. Usually it's used on the server side, but it's just an in general software concept. Kind of, yeah. That's one aspect to it. So this term middleware is used in a lot of different systems. You'll see it in the field. It's just when you inject functionality into something to add features. So we are injecting the features of this tool, Redux Thunk, into Redux. We're adding something to it when originally, the way it was built, it didn't have this feature. So what is the feature that we're adding to Redux? The what? Thunk. The ability to use functions. Yeah, the ability to return functions. Yep. And that will now allow us to use fetch.
Before we go too crazy on the composing answers,
Mhm.
we didn't cover in class injecting Redux scripts, or at least I don't remember that.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know it gets real bizarre.
Yeah, right. So in this slide, this is the boilerplate for your store.js, and you're going to see this. Redux DevTools extension compose. So this is really awkward, but you're just going to have to take this for granted. This is how you start, how you make the Redux DevTools work. So if you don't do this, I told you to install it, but up until now, if you looked at it, it doesn't work. Yeah, it says no store found. Make sure to follow the instructions. So if you look in the instructions, you'll see this. Now, why it needs to do that? Well, I don't think we need to get into that too much. But we just need to do it, to have the debugging tools available.
I guess my point was, when you go to the documentation,
Mhm.
we're literally just copying and pasting, and the pluses are not meant to be typed, they're meant to be
Yeah,
add that line to your store.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Preloaded state. I don't know why there's the comments before and after, but I know it's state.
Yeah. Preloaded just means the state that is already there, which is our state.js.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you could read this instruction manual and see all this cluttered stuff of code and try to make sense of that. Or you could just take it for granted and just say, all I do is copy and paste this and put it in store.js. Done and done. So, yes, you're going to have two actions anytime you're trying to do a fetch call. So, and we noticed, yep, we're now, for the action that does the fetch call, we're returning this function. And the function is what's going to do the fetch call. What's going on right here? Is there anything weird about where did we do this before, this line of code? Is that any different than what? Yeah, yep. This is just what we did in map dispatch to props. We just dispatched an action. It's no different. You can dispatch wherever you want, wherever it's appropriate. So you might think in the second then, when you actually have the data and it's in a variable as a JavaScript object or array, that's probably appropriate in terms of when you should dispatch users loaded. Or, you could word this any way you want. Users have been loaded. So that you're telling Redux, okay, I fetched these users and now they are here. They came from the internet. It took 5 seconds because there's some stuff going on and it was bogged down, but now they've gotten here. Now I must tell Redux about that. Do you think, does anything unusual have to be done in the reducers? Does anything out of the ordinary have to be done in the reducers to accommodate fetch or thunk other than what we've already done? Still have to code a reducer to care about the type. Is there going to be any weird code? Error? Which error? Yeah, we could, but we're not gonna distract ourselves with that. But that wouldn't be anything different. We would just say, what do you mean state? Just depends. Well, I mean, so if we had our reducer users and it was caring about users loaded, did this reducer care that the users came from a hard-coded state file or the fetch call? Is there anything in here that's making, no. The reducer does not care where the information came from. It just needs to be aware that there's some new information, which is what happens when you dispatch. Remember? So we dispatch, the code magically jumps over here, and then your reducer says, hey, I care that users were loaded, and I'm going to return that value to update the store. But as far as reducers go, nothing's changed. They don't care where the data came from. But from the perspective of where do you start all this out, we still have this action called load users. Is that in here? No, I didn't put that in there. And someone has to start the action. So that's what app did. Nothing changed. App still says, okay, when I mount, I need to load data. So, well, in our case, it's load users. App's still responsible for that. But it's no different. All you do is follow the trail of why does load users exist? Because you map dispatch to props. What happens in load users? It just does a fetch call. And then what do you do when the fetch call is done? You just dispatch an action. So returning a function is pretty much the only thing that is new. We know how to use fetch. We know how to dispatch anything, whatever. Reducers don't change. And then we just take this, the store for granted, that we just copy and paste that, put it in there. So that's fine, but that's all. It's fine to see that, but obviously we need to practice that. So in day 10, there's a Redux thunk practice. And all it's going to be, did I download that already? This is going to be another one of those not very attractive looking interfaces. It's just going to be completely utilitarian. But it's going to be set up the same way everything else has. It's going to have the the localhost 4000 stuff going on. You're going to have products, contacts, vehicle comments. You're going to create the actions to load all of those, and then the actions to make them. Okay, so I think I put the code in there already, so you can see that the Redux dev tools are actually working. And you probably want to experiment with that. But so when I look at the project, the server already has, let's see, I'll just look up here. The server already has data. So once you hook something up properly, data should be showing. So the DB JSON has contacts in it, comments, vehicles. So if you hook it up properly, it should show up over here. And then all the code to actually to capture whatever you type in here and the click, that's already coded, but you just have to create the container and create the actions. Let's see. So the containers are even made. Yeah, you just have to create the actions and then probably have the reducers care about those actions. And you'll have to make a fetch post call. So you need to know how to do that from the fetch checklist, which is right here. Or you can use a cheat sheet. So that's how you do a post. Again, however you need to reorganize all this information to make sense to you. You need to go ahead and do that. But, so we'll work on that practice, and then I think we'll just do a work day on Wednesday to just start working on the checklist, because we've gone over everything, or sorry, the checkpoint. We've gone over everything for checkpoint 1 as of now. Now that we know how to incorporate fetch into Redux. Let's see, component to mount, life cycles. Any questions about that?
What is checkpoint 1? Does that have to do anything with the movie DB thing?
Yep. Good question. So we are going to use an API for the moviedb.org. You'll want to watch this video for how you sign up for the MovieDB. If you can't figure it out yourself, I mean, it's just signing up, the typical steps, email, verify your email. It's totally free. You don't have to put any credit card information or anything like that. And their API is fairly simple. And you just use fetch requests to call their API, which has the information of any movie ever made. And what you will be doing is making a Netflix clone. And that will, yep, containers, yeah, that's just going to be, it's just going to be a interface that looks like Netflix, and you search movies, and then you add movies to your list.
Exactly, your checkpoints again, just like a project.
Yeah, like a project that uses everything we've learned up to this point, and then checkpoints are worth more in terms of grade. Yeah, they're actually worth significantly more. So if you didn't do anything else, you would just want to do your checkpoints. Let's see. What else? You could install Postman if you wanted to test stuff. Did you want to see anything specific about the checkpoint? Like, it's just a normal like project like all the rest of them.
Right.
It just like is more realistic, I guess. Like you're making a real thing, kind of. It just uses the API, and it uses that db.json file to save stuff for your movie list.
That's the actual movie.
Does it what?
Is it the actual movie or is it just the information about it?
Only information about the movie. Didn't you say something about how to play the movies, like the trailers?
Yeah, I got trailers working.
Yeah. So you could actually use this as a basis for a more interesting thing. So wherever you get movie trailers, where do you get movie trailers from? Just YouTube? Yeah, YouTube. You can use that API and use the information in conjunction with YouTube to show a trailer. That's all available out there. Oh, good point. I was going to point this out. So I added something to interesting web APIs. So if these are more things you can add to any project you want to work on. Notifications. Does anyone know what notifications are? Have you seen that in a web browser? Yeah, so this is the code for how you create notifications. And what is the importance of a notification? Like, why is this even a cool thing? Or
Bring people to your website.
On your website, so show up.
Yeah, exactly. Nope. So, why is this not working? Oh, I did. Okay, let me do it on a different one. Yeah, I'm so used to that. It's like just subconscious deny. I didn't want to deny it. Well, it's better because I want to accept it on my own website. It's not working. I don't know why. It should be working. But, right, so it is a special feature that if something happens on your website and you want to get their attention, well, if I'm on this is my website, but the user is like looking at this other website, how can you get their attention while they're looking over here? Right, there's nothing I could code with HTML that could tell them that, hey, I have to tell you something. But now there's a new, didn't even ask me. There's a new feature, which of course the person has to accept it because it's kind of, what do you call it? An annoyance, yeah. So they do have to accept it, but if they do, which, yeah. I don't know why it's not working. Usually works. Something weird's happening. But yeah, if the person is using your software for a very specific reason, they would allow it because they're like, oh, your app helps me. Your app will just sit there, and then if something happens, it'll give me a notification and tell me. Like, what's the most common use of a notification? No. Yeah. Email or what's the second most common one? Text, well, chat, yeah, instant message. So you're over here You're like, ooh, I must study this fetch checklist. But then another tab has your email stuff in it or a chat thing, and then it pops up and says, hey, someone's trying to talk to you. Without the notification, that's not possible. So that's cool. That one is actually pretty standard. That one's more across the board than others. But I want to point another one out that is not totally across the board. This is more specialized, probably only works really well on Chrome, but it's pretty cool. I mean, this, like, things you can do anything. You can make so much stuff because of the capabilities. Hello? I can now talk to the computer and it will type out what I say. Isn't this awesome? Right? So now browsers even have text or voice to text built in. So what could you do with this? This is amazing.
Doesn't have good punctuation.
It's okay. Period. Question mark. Exclamation mark. It just depends. Like, for me, it's always worked very well, but you know, there's always quirks. So you can talk to a computer and a computer can talk back to you through the browser. Whoa, awesome. Yeah. And then one more, there's APIs without authentication. So this is a listing of all like public APIs of all these different topics. So you want to look at something with sports or sports and fitness, and then tells you if you need authentication or if you can just use it just publicly. So now you have all this data that you can just get. You have all these crazy tools, like the computer can read words and talk, or it can recognize your voice. It can know your location. It can take pictures. Like, you can do so much stuff right now at this point. So just throwing that out there for ideas for final projects or however you want to explore and be creative. So yeah, so the practice, it's just gonna show stuff here once you hook it up correctly, and then when you make a new comment or a new contact, what do you think is going to happen over here? It's going to add it there. Okay, that's all I have for you today. So start working on those projects and let me know if you need any help.